moderators. It's particularly important as we are being live streamed by the council. Experience so far has shown that you need to lean into the microphone for the microphone to pick up your voice. Otherwise, it kind of the microphone ducks out. So if you just bear that in mind when it comes to your turn to speak. Does anyone present have any objections to the sessions being live streamed? Just in terms of housekeeping, could the council please remind us about the usual fire alarms, evacuation procedures? Thank you.
Yes, we've had our weekly fire alarm test already, so there is no planned further tests. So if the fire alarm goes off, it is a real fire alarm and we should vacate the building. The exits are clearly marked above the exits. Our rendezvous point is by the Costa Coffee on the Broadway, which hopefully everyone will be aware of. And then there is toilet facilities out the door to the left and refreshments also out the door to the right.
Thank you. Just in terms of the hearing session today, it will take the form of a structured discussion, which we shall lead based on the agenda and matters and issues and questions before us. We will try and bring people in at the relevant point, and just to put your nameplate on edge if you wish to speak, and we shall bring you in as soon as we can. We would like to remind everyone taking part in the discussion that you should have provided all your evidence in your original representations, and this is not the opportunity to submit anything further. Any comments that you make during the hearing sessions should therefore relate to your original representations. And please respect each other, allowing people to speak and finish their points. And just a reminder that questions should come through us rather than directly to other participants. There aren't really any participants for the first session, so I'm sure the council know how it all goes so far. Just turning to outstanding actions, there are a number of things just arising from the first 2 weeks. We've received the copy of the action list for the second week. We've provided some feedback on that. So if you could take that on board, that would be great. Thank you. Also, just so other participants are aware, the council has prepared some updated housing figures, and these are in the form of documents LC32, which sets out housing requirement and supply scenarios paper. That arises from discussion on matter 4. There's also a revised version of the council's matter 15 housing land supply statement, which is WS 15-1. And there's also updated housing calculations in document LC 33. And LC 34 relates to sources of supply, again to inform matter 15. So just to make participants aware of those, we will be coming back to those in the site allocation sessions and also in matter 15, just in case you haven't clocked those on the website yet. But obviously, please do check the website on regular basis, because obviously just to make sure you're aware of any new documents that are coming up. I am conscious there have been a number of statements of common ground as well. The council is still pushing forward on those, and that there have been some modifications arising from those. Does the council just want to say a few words on that, please?
So yes, we do continue to work on the statements of common ground. However, inevitably, given where we are in the process, that exercise is I think, slowly and inevitably reaching its conclusion. Throughout the Statement of Common Ground process, the Council has sought to reach agreement, a position of common ground, as it says on the tin. That has generated, I would say, a relatively small number of modifications, which we are wrapping up in the form of discrete addendums to each of the neighbourhood and place areas. So for today, as the council talks through the modifications that are set out through PD 11, the council will also refer to the addendum which exists, which has been prepared to PD 11, that introduces those modifications that have arisen through the Statement of Common Ground that relate to the central area. That list of modifications also includes the consequential amendments that arise from the work, the very hard work that's been undertaken to recalculate the housing land supply figure. I would like to hope it will all be clear and evident as we go through PD 11 and its addendum. The examination's been furnished with a copy of today's addendum for the central area. There will be further area-related addendums that follow shortly.
Thank you. Just to double check the sort of proposed modifications that I've sort of been provided a copy with, are those available for participants as well? Because obviously it may relate, or may come to that in the discussion on slides.
My sincere apologies for my eagerness. The addendum that relates to the central area has been submitted to the examination. We will continue to do so as soon as the other addendums become available. My apologies to the inspector. This is not what the council would ideally have liked. It is a dynamic process, particularly in relation to those consequential modifications that have arisen through housing land supply recalculation. Nevertheless, my apologies.
I think so long as that information aids the examination and helps us to move forward, I think we're happy to take a pragmatic view on that. Just to echo your sentiment about the work that's gone into the housing figures, you've done a really good job of turning those around in a short space of time. And it really will, aid the discussion on matter 15, housing land supply. So thank you, and I appreciate how much work's gone into that. So thank you very much. What I would say in terms of modifications, obviously we've just really had sight of those. So can I ask, as we go through the site allocation sessions, for you to draw our attention to those, just in any of the modifications? That would be really helpful. Thank you. So just if there aren't any other outstanding matters, have I forgotten anything in terms of procedural information? No. Okay, thank you. Well, we shall move on to the agenda and matter 16, the site selection process. What I will say is that we do have a lot to get through today in terms of the matter 16 and also 22 site allocations to go through. And obviously we'll have a number of participants. Now, obviously I have seen the written statements for matter 16 and 17, and where that we feel that we have enough information on that particular issue or site, we might just move on, just to save time. So just so you're aware of that, because I don't think anyone wants to be sitting beyond 5 o'clock today, really. But it's not that we haven't, given consideration to those matters or those sites. It's just we feel we'll have enough information on that. So just be aware of that. So without further ado, just looking and bearing in mind what I said about not necessarily asking all of the questions on the MIQs. In relation to the first question, in terms of the site selection process and how that ties in with the sustainability process and testing of reasonable alternatives, just having a look at the council's answers, I did note, I think it was 5.3.6 of the integrated impact assessment states that a total of 81 sites out of a total pool of 378 sites were identified suitable for allocation at the time of the draft plan, consultation plan 2020. And that those sites were sort of narrowed down as part of the process. I just wondered whether the integrated impact assessment assessed that broader pool of sites, the 378 sites. Did it influence which sites were taken forward or not, or did the council narrow down the sites before them being subject to the IIA process?
Yes, thank you. The figure of the 300 plus sites was identified through the London SLA process, and this looked at a range of sites which, dare I say, ranged from appropriate site allocations to sites which were simply not developable and not deliverable. Those sites, for example, included large swathes of town centres in multiple land ownership with no developer interest. This was a process that was carried out throughout London, and I think it's fair to say that all local authorities, when they went through and sifted, though that process reduced significantly the amount of developable sites. What we have in the plan is developable sites, sites which will come forward in the plan period. So that process happened prior to the integrated impact assessment. That process happened prior to the Regulation 18 version of the document being consulted upon. So in answer to your question, the integrated impact assessment didn't look at the assessment of those, unless Angela's going to come in and kick me under the table. But we effectively narrowed that down essentially through the London SLA process.
Yes, so the site allocations were set before the integrated impact assessment looked at those, but they did look at the actual methodology that we had used, and they had determined that there was no additional sites needed at that stage, and that the sifting exercise that we had done had been robust. And also, in terms of the sites that were identified in the SLA, we've had a continual process where we've revisited that SLA, because obviously that started way back in 2016. So on occasions we've gone back and revisited them to see if they're still suitable and deliverable, and otherwise if there's others that we could actually include that were originally excluded as well.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth adding that, Angela is absolutely right. This has been a dynamic process through the development of the plan, and we've revisited sites that we may have excluded at that point, which we then got intelligence that developers were coming forward or interested in having site allocations. We've also had 3 call for sites during the process, the latest of which at the Regulation 19 stages, 6 new sites. I say new sites, but these were sites that had already been considered, but only 6 new sites were put forward as part of that call for site process, none of which are suitable site allocations because of, designation. So I guess I want to sort of reiterate the phrase that we've said quite a lot in this examination, that we have left no stone unturned in terms of trying to find sites within the borough.
Okay, thank you. And table 1 of EB 15 sets out the screening criteria that we use for potential development sites. How were those criteria determined, and was there any specific public consultation on those criteria as part of the process?
Yeah, so the criteria in table 1 was in line with the London-wide SLA, so that effectively it looked at whether it was an existing site allocation or consented scheme, the site size, whether there was any kind of open space designation, whether there was any allocated biodiversity within the site, whether it was a social housing estate, and so on. The London SLA was a publicly available process with all documents available to the public. Angela, can you remember if there was actual public consultation on it?
Don't recall, so. I don't believe there was a consultation on the London-wide SLA, but all London boroughs were involved in a working group. So all planners had input into that London-wide SLA. And also it was assessed through the London Plan examination as well.
Thank you. And of the 75 sites, were all of the sites subject to sustainability appraisal?
Yes, I believe there have been. We have also just carried out a recent integrated impact assessment, and that was just to look at the uplift associated with the last set of to do with the buffer, the 20% buffer.
The IIA has been updated.
That was updated, yes, in June this year. And in terms of the conclusions from that, can be found at the back of matter 16. That starts at after page 12, matter 16.
Okay, thank you. And are the reasons for selecting the preferred sites and rejecting others clear and justified, and where are those set out?
Yes, within the site allocations background paper, Appendix A has a series of tables. Those show in green cells the sites that have been included with the plan, and red cells where they haven't been. And then in the final column for each of the tables in Appendix A, it sets out the reason for exclusion. Also on page 44, which is table A14, That also includes a summary of the reasons why sites were excluded and the numbers for each site.
And you say that obviously due to the 20% buffer, the council's kind of gone back and reviewed that list of sites to see if any of those sites could come back into the equation.
Yes, we did. We did that. Yes, we went through those sites, the ones that we have excluded from the site allocations. We went back to the call for sites in Reg 19 to do an assessment of those sites, of which, as I said, there aren't many, but each of those sites we are confident that they are not suitable sites. Mainly because they are protected, well, a significant proportion of them are protected, designated open space or have high biodiversity value in terms of the site.
And also the additional supply top-up paper sets out the sites that we've looked at in the tables at the back of that paper, and that identifies the specific increases in the supply for each site.
So having reviewed the sites that were excluded originally, it was decided that those sites weren't suitable. So it's been more of a strategy of increasing densities on existing sites, really.
Sorry, yes, yes, I can confirm that. So what we've done is we've looked at sites where we have, obviously, as Carol pointed out, this is a dynamic process, and we continue to work with our development partners through the pre-application process. So there are site allocations where we are getting to the point where we have an agreed position at advanced pre-app stage. So there's been a few sites which have increased on that regard. And then we've looked at sites where we have had reps saying that there is the potential to increase development capacity within sites. And officers have used the kind of professional judgment to consider whether or not that is appropriate. And I believe there's a number of sites where we have increased the capacity.
And in terms of establishing site capacities, I mean that has been an issue that has been raised by participants. I'm sure we'll come on to that in the site allocation sessions. But in broad terms, how have the site capacities been established? What process has the council gone through?
Yes, if I start with the kind of the broad sense, and then hand over to Angela if I miss anything. In terms of the way in which we assessed capacity, so very much on a site-by-site basis, depending on where the site is. So obviously, if the site has an approval or we are at the point of a committee, etc., we've used the capacities through that process. Where we have site allocations that have advanced pre-application discussions where both parties are generally happy with the capacity, we have used those capacities. Where there is no position in terms of advanced pre-apps, we've fallen back to a mathematical process where we've used densities which are generally in line with the London SHLA exercise as a starting point to calculate overall residential capacity. And also in terms of the non-residential capacity, we've used officer judgment in terms of a percentage base calculation, depending on the hierarchy of the hierarchy of where the site is. For example, if it's in a metropolitan centre, then we'd expect a greater degree of non-residential uses, etc. We have, on occasions, on a site-by-site basis, looked at the sensitivities of the site. Now, that might be to do with the adjacencies to conservation areas, or whether the site is within the conservation area, etc. And then we've applied a sensitivity in those instances to the baseline density calculation. That's clearly set out in the site allocation background paper EB 15. Anything else?
Just also to say that in addition to planning applications and pre-applications, where we've had some master plan studies already conducted in the borough, we've used figures from those as well. And that means that about 52% of the sites have been used actual figures, and 48% have used this more theoretical approach of those 75 sites. Also in the site allocations background paper, in section 7, that goes into detail about how we have looked at the indicative site capacities. Table 2 in particular shows the density assumptions which were in the London plan SHLA, and that's what we have used as the basis for ours. Then it goes on paragraph 7.3.6 to talk about the sensitivity analysis that we've used. So, for instance, some sites we've actually increased the setting from urban to central in some areas where we felt that densities could be increased, and vice versa. So some sites have gone down as well. For instance, if it's located next to a conservation area, for instance.
I think the point's been raised that the London plan is moving away from the sort of set density matrix and more towards a design-led approach. What's the council's view on that?
Yes, we accept that, which is why the capacities are indicative, and the plan clearly states that these are indicative capacities, and a design-led approach for each site will have to be done at the development management stage. Given that we have 75 sites, again, I think it would be unreasonable to suggest that the council have to prepare master plans for each of the sites that it doesn't have, capacities for. That would be 48%, nearly half of those 75%, 75 sites being master planned and then modelled in terms of massing, which would be a huge cost to the council, given the number of sites that we have. So we've taken this theoretical approach, which is a robust methodology which has been used in the London plan, but also in other London Authority local plans. It's a tried and tested approach, and as I said, there is flexibility there because the capacities are clearly stated within the local plan as indicative.
And we've touched on before the potential for the Bakerloo line extension to come forward, more likely towards the back end of the period. How did the council look at establishing the higher densities on some sites in the south? What was the process the council went through?
So essentially, we've looked at those sites which are generally clustered around Belgreen, Lower Sydenham, in terms of the significant uplift. And what we've looked at is the potential uplift in density, referring back to the London SHLA table of densities, but also the assumption that if Belgreen Lower Sydenham, for example, was an opportunity area, then it would move it into a higher category in terms of the density range. And that then effectively calculates the density range that we've indicated within the local plan.
It moved to an urban or central kind of density range.
Yes, I think we're just having a look. It moves from PTL bracket of 2 to 3 up to 4 to 5, and it also, with the allocation of an opportunity area, it moves up to central.
So the council sort of tried to take a sort of a methodological approach to the setting of densities, but as you say, those capacities are indicative, so there'd be room for discussion and negotiation on those sites.
Oh yes, absolutely. And I I think it's fair to say, and I've said it before at the previous sessions, that generally what we see is those residential figures generally go up, and some of the non-residential go down. And obviously the plan has that built-in flexibility to allow for that, but it has to be done on a site-by-site basis, responding to the existing and emerging character, in response to the NPPF and the National Design Guide, etc. And also where we have got endorsed frameworks and master plans in place, we'd be expecting those site capacities to have reference to those master plans and frameworks.
I'm just looking at the mixed-use sites. You sort of touched on it, but I would just like you to take us through how you have established the mix of uses on mixed-use sites in terms of the information in table 7.1 of the site allocations paper.
Yes, so this is set out in our site allocations background paper in section 8, and in particular table 3 sets out the assumptions that we've used for mixed-use sites. Once again, this was a theoretical approach, but it looked at the different types of sites and then applied different proportions for residential, town centre and employment uses depending on the type of site. So sites that we did categorise related to re-provision of employment sites. So for instance, ELSIS and SIL sites. And for that, we decided that between 33 and 60% of the site should be employment use. The next set was about sites where they're re-providing.
Sorry to stop you in your tracks there, but just before I forget, in terms of the percentages, when you say that between 33 and 60 whatever percent should still be employment use, what basis is that calculated on? Is that floor space? Can you, because I know obviously there's some intensification of sites, but in terms of what impact that would have overall on the amount of employment land on that particular site? Would that result in a loss of employment land, for example?
The range in percentages exactly to cover that point. So we've looked at on a site-by-site basis. We've looked at the existing employment floor space. And then the percentage has been sort of calculated accordingly so that there is no net loss. And in many cases, there is a small uplift in employment floor space where we are intensifying. those employment uses.
So I'm just still trying to get my head around what how that would, how that's been calculated in terms of the percentage. So you're saying that you would try to retain the existing amount of floor space in itself, so there shouldn't be any loss of employment floor space. But what do the percentages relate to then? Can you just explain that?
Yeah, so officers did an assessment of, on a site-by-site basis, an assessment of the existing floor space of employment. And then obviously we have our policies, which are effectively saying there should be no net loss of that employment floor space. And therefore, using the theoretical basis and the percentage basis that we have, we've essentially had to provide a range between 33% and 60% to cover and make sure that the indicative capacities represent that no net loss policy.
Also on each site, we looked at the proportion across the whole of the site, and we got a figure for that. But then we also looked at the existing use on the site, and to generate a net figure to make sure, just as a sensitivity check, to make sure that there was no significant losses in employment or retail or whatever on those sites.
So essentially, the objective of not having a net loss of employment land would be achieved through increased densities on that site. And in terms of town centre uses, if a site is already in the town centre and may already have town centre uses on that, how would the council ensure that there would be no net loss of town centre uses on that site? In terms of the use of the percentages on sites within town centres?
I think the approach we used there was that we wanted to retain a quarter of the site within town centre uses. And then also for where we wanted to see re-provision of high value retail uses, we would have up to between 33 and 50% of the site as main town centre uses. Once again, we went through that approach where we looked at the full site, looked at the existing floor space, and then did the sensitivity check to make sure that the net use wasn't providing net loss, significant net loss retail.
So again, it would be achieved through the intensification of the use of that site. Okay, I think the written statements addressed my other questions on the MIQs, but I just wanted to explore the difference between in the site allocations set out in part 3. What the difference is between development requirements and development guidelines. I think there was a very fine line there, and arguably some of the guidelines could potentially be requirements. I think it's treading a fine line there. Would it be simpler to have them all as just requirements or guidelines? And I suppose it's whether it's clear to a developer or user of the plan what is, what is actually required. And for example, some of the sites may have as a guideline the the need to take into account adjacent heritage assets, for example. Now, would that not necessarily be a requirement? So it just struck me reading through the site allocations that some may fall into the other kind of category, and it may be something that we can, having flagged it up, we can pick up as we go through each of the site sessions.
Yes, happy to be guided by the inspectors on this. I think the intention here is to distinguish between, particularly on a site-by-site basis, those development requirements which are absolute certainties versus those development guidelines where we're saying you must consider this, but there is a degree of flex in terms of how that then is applied. It feels like, and it sounds as though that we haven't quite hit that balance correctly, and that some of those guidelines could be requirements. So it might become clearer through the discussions on each of the sites, where those categories fall. If the inspectors feel that it would be clearer either to have a clear definition and for the council to relook at those, then we can certainly do that. Or if the inspectors feel that they should all be development requirements, then again, we're happy to consider that.
I think some of the guidelines have consultation requirements, which obviously, in the guidelines it sets out a need to consult, which couldn't necessarily be a requirement, as we've touched on in previous sessions. So that's something to bear in mind. But I think there's certainly some of the guidelines which may be better suited in the requirements section. But I think if we can pick that up as we go through the site allocations, it's maybe something just to bear in mind.
Yeah, more than happy to do so, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I'm very conscious of time, so that concludes my questions on the site selection process. So thank you for that. I'm going to suggest just to allow people time to reorganise themselves and get back to the table, that we have a 15 or so 20-minute break till 10:35, and then we can move on to matter 17. We shall adjourn till then. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We shall now open the session on matter 17, the central area allocations. Now, just to double check, was everyone in attendance for the opening earlier on this morning? Just to save me going through the formal opening. Brilliant, thank you. Just a reminder though to make sure that phones are switched to silent or switched off, and that laptops are switched to silent. Just drawing on experience from the first 2 weeks, if you have your laptop too close to the microphone, it can result in some interference. So just bear that in mind. You may need to move it to one side. Just a reminder to make sure that your mic's switched off when you're not speaking, bearing in mind that we're being live streamed. As you were here for the opening, I don't need to remind you of the need to be respectful of other participants. If you wish to speak, please put your nameplate up on Edge. I'll try and bring you in as soon as possible. I just wanted, before we get started, just to say a few words about how the site allocation sessions are going to work and how they will feed into Matter 15, the housing land supply sessions. We will be testing the deliverability of sites in these sessions against the MPPF definition of deliverable and developable and the guidance in the PPG. As I mentioned at the start, the council has updated the housing trajectory and housing requirement figures, and those are on the website, so just to be aware of that. As we go through each of the sites, we will be testing the timing and delivery of the sites, and it may be that changes are made to the start dates and to the annual output on each site. So just to bear that in mind, I would like to ask the council if the council can keep the trajectory up to date. So whatever is agreed in the session in terms of the timing delivery of each particular site, if you could keep that up to date as we go through. Because the idea is that the updated trajectory will feed into Matter 15, the housing land supply session, and in theory we should have an up-to-date position in terms of housing land supply for Matter 15, and I think it'd be easier to keep it up to date every day rather than trying to do it just before the session. I think we just have west and east that you might need to update to inform the housing land supply session. So if you can just bear that in mind as we go through, that would be really helpful. Thank you. Without further ado, if I could ask participants for today's session to introduce yourselves, please, beginning with the council and working our way around. Thank you.
Hello, David Syme. I'm the head of strategic planning at Lewisham.
Angela Stewart, Principal Policy Officer at Lewisham.
Good morning. I'm Karol Jakubczyk. I'm the Lewisham's Planning Policy Manager.
Sorry, I didn't quite get your name.
I'm Russell Harris, KC. I've got to my right Chris Mealy, and to my left Mr. Grant Leggett, and to his left David Van der Lond. And we've sent a schedule of appearances to you. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Peter Luder from the Culverley Green Conservation Area Residents Association.
Good morning. My name is Heather Sargent, Sargent of Council, on behalf of Lewisham House Number 1, and to my right is Mr. Chris Benham, who is a partner at Knight Frank.
Morning, Matthew Sherwood from Quad on behalf of Landsec, who are the owners of Lewisham Shopping Centre.
And I'm John Watson from Landsec.
You're in a bit of a blind spot for me there, so if I don't see you, just wave your hands around and to get my attention, just with my laptop screen being there. Okay, thank you. Well, if we can start now by moving through the agenda. In terms of the overall vision and spatial objectives, I have read the council's statement on that. I didn't have any further questions on those. I can see some twitching of nameplates going on there. So what I would just remind people of is to stick to your original Regulation 19 representations. It's not an opportunity to introduce any new material. So just a reminder on that. Yes, you would like to make a point in terms of the vision and objectives.
Thank you, Madam. It's just the, whilst the introductory page is quite helpful in setting out the relevance of heritage considerations, it's just, as you know, our representations have been the lack of reference to heritage considerations on some sites. And I would just point out in the vision, paragraph 14.7, and in the key spatial objectives, numbers 4 and 6, there really ought to be some reference to heritage protection as a consideration. So it's in the introduction, but it isn't followed through in the vision and the objectives.
Thank you. Can I just ask the council to respond to that, please?
We're happy to introduce reference to heritage assets within an appropriate place in those key spatial objectives. I think it might be sensible to have that within number 6, which is about reinforcing and enhancing the character.
Would that allay your concerns?
Yes, I think that would be fine. Thank you.
I am conscious that there were proposed modifications, I think, in terms of vision objectives. If the council just wished to take us through that while I try and find my copy. Thank you.
If the inspectors could give me just a moment to get to the relevant part of PD11. Thank you. Yes, if I may, there are.
And just bear with me while I get to the page. Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Yes, there are 3 modifications proposed that relate to context and character, paragraph 14.5, paragraph 14.9 and figure 14.2. They are numbered modifications MO 84, 85 and 86. The first of those is to delete a superfluous full stop. The second is also to delete a superfluous full stop. MO 86, however, introduces a more substantial modification under figure 14.2 key spatial objectives, and at 10 introduces text that states 10 improved health across the borough through supporting the longevity of the existing University Hospital Lewisham estate through a phased master plan approach and site-wide decarbonisation strategy. Facilitate connectivity to the surrounds, including the Ravensbourne River, public realm along Lewisham High Street and nearby open spaces.
And there's a reference there also to the additional annotation potentially on figure 14.2 central area key diagram to identify the location of the university hospital. Is that a
Yes, my mistake. That is correct.
Okay, thank you. MO85, I think that relates to the policy LCA 4 day 21 corridor, but it's, I mean, it's only a full stop, so don't need to worry too much about that. Okay, thank you. Any other points in terms of the vision and key spatial objectives? Okay, moving on to policy LCA1, central area place principles. I have read the council statement on this. I don't have any additional questions on LCA1. Were there any comments from other participants on LCA1? No. Okay, as I said, we have a lot to get through today, so where I don't have any questions, I shall just move swiftly on. In terms of policy LCA2, Lewisham Major Centre and surrounds, is the approach of seeking to secure Lewisham as a metropolitan centre of sub-regional significance in London justified by the evidence? I appreciate there's a reference to in the London plan, but what's the evidence to support the principle of that?
Yeah, so we have the reference within the London plan, which follows on from our Lewisham Town Centre local plan, which predates the London plan, which provides the policy basis for the aspiration or ambition for Lewisham Town Centre to become a metropolitan centre. That is something or an ambition that the council has been working to deliver through the comprehensive redevelopment of a number of sites within the town centre, which is increasing the capacity or density of residential, but also the non-residential floor space through sites such as Lewisham Gateway, Lewisham Renaissance, etc., etc. This is to essentially provide that regional draw, which we feel is necessary not only for our Lewisham residents, but also residents from afar. There is definitely, if you look at the spatial distribution of metropolitan centres within London, there is a kind of spatial deficiency within this area of metropolitan centres, and we strongly believe that Lewisham Town Centre can fill that gap. It is a policy ambition that is continued forward, as I said, from adopted policy into the new local plan.
What are the criteria that Lewisham would need to meet to qualify, if you like, as a metropolitan centre?
It's a very interesting discussion, this. Obviously, in terms of the metropolitan threshold, there are thresholds set out within the London Plan, which establishes benchmark floor space for metropolitan centres. Now, at the time, dare I say that the London Plan and the thresholds don't necessarily reflect the changes in kind of a real world situation, and also the changes to Class E. It is primarily focused around retail, comparison retail in the large. What we're seeing is that that is dynamically changing, and actually I think there is a question potentially to be asked in a kind of future revision of the London Plan. What is a metropolitan centre in the new world, when essentially retail and the town centre uses, which are appropriate for town centres such as major and metropolitan centres, are changing essentially. The draft local plan has taken a fairly flexible approach in line with the changes to the use class, but also in recognition that people are using our town centres in a much more broad way, which includes, leisure uses, F&B uses, community uses, etc. So in terms of the absolute threshold, I accept that effectively the London Plan has a fairly binary criteria, which is primarily focused on retail. The council is taking a more flexible approach and looking at a comprehensive set of town centre uses to attract that regional draw.
And presumably that's why the local plan doesn't necessarily designate the Lewisham as a metropolitan centre. It just aspires to do so.
Absolutely. We recognise that there's work to be done with our colleagues at the GLA to effectively thrash these issues out, to understand what a new set of criteria and thresholds would be for a new metropolitan centre in the context of London.
As you say, I think it's quite a binary approach in the London Plan. I think it's often more about the role that the centre plays in relation to the surrounding area, isn't it, as opposed to just necessarily set thresholds.
Yes. I think it's worth saying that, as I said before, that we are aspiring to have a kind of sub-regional role for Lewisham Town Centre to draw people in. It's also worth pointing out that Lewisham Interchange has been identified as one of 4 significant transport hubs within the Mayor's transport strategy, recognising that Lewisham is a significant interchange. So I think there is definitely support and there is definitely evidence to suggest that Lewisham can have that sub-regional draw.
Thank you. To briefly reiterate the point that David made about the sort of the need to reappraise how metropolitan centres sort of sit and are classified and assessed. But nevertheless, I would, in the interests of being helpful to the examination, refer to London Plan figures 2.17 and 2.18, which I think firstly show the distribution of the capital's town centre network, and I think very graphically demonstrate the geographic hole that would neatly be filled by Lewisham Town Centre, but also under as stated under 2.18, sort of demonstrates how the London Plan has previously assessed that hierarchy and classified that hierarchy. I would reiterate again very briefly the point made by David that a future London plan, I think out of necessity would need to revisit that, not only taking in account the changes introduced through the reclassification of use classes under Class E, but also for the simple fact that those metropolitan centres shown on figure 2.17, I think from knowledge and experience have all experienced the structural changes that are being experienced everywhere in terms of retail as it evolves and changes into the 21st century. So the sort of the assessment hierarchy shown on figure 2.18 the council would suggest will need reviewing, and the council will suggest obviously that favours or potentially supports Lewisham Town Centre's case going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I had no further questions on policy LCA 2. Just double checking. Weren't any further points on that before we move on? Okay, thank you. Moving on to policy LCA 3, Catford Major Centre and Surrounds. Reference is made to the Catford Town Centre framework. And what status does that have, and has it been subject to public consultation?
Yeah, so the Catford master plan or development framework was endorsed by the council through Mayor and Cabinet. It has been subject to multiple rounds of public consultation in the past. So whilst it is not a supplementary planning document, the council considers that it is a material consideration through the development management process.
If it's not an adopted SPD, is it appropriate to refer to it in the policy itself?
I mean, the council would certainly maintain its position that it is appropriate. It has been the subject of multiple rounds of public consultation. As I say, it is sets the kind of direction for growth within Catford, and we are using that document through the pre-application process at the moment, discussing sites within the major centre.
Okay, thank you. We shall, take a view on that. I'm conscious that Culverley Green Residents Association raised a point in relation to policy LCA 3. Is this an appropriate time to raise that?
Thank you, Madam. We were concerned about the inclusion of story numbers in the actual allocation. I think we've understood now the need for the council to include story heights in the local plan, but that doesn't mean to say we're necessarily happy with the figures for the two sites that we're concerned about, which are 19 and 22, but I believe it's more appropriate to speak about those under the individual site allocations.
Thank you. think the Residents Association had suggested a change to LCO 3F criterion FC. Relates to addressing the relationship of new development within the Coverley Green Conservation Area to the south.
Yes, so thank you. So effectively, our concern is, as I said, it's about the maximum height figure. We were of the view that since the indicative development capacity is indicative, and as I mentioned at the last session that I attended, that the capacity matter seemed to be leading the assessment of heights. I question whether it had been. We therefore thought that the text that I've shown in red should be used in order to further clarify that height is not being determined at this point. I know that the council has stressed that that is the case, that there will be further review. I think if we were able to, in the further discussion on individual sites, and I have spoken with Mr. Syme certainly about site 19, if we were able to identify a bit more clarity and granularity in terms of those heights, we might be able to step back from the additional wording.
Okay, thank you. So the suggested change to criterion FC is not being pursued, subject to discussions on the individual site.
That's correct.
I think questions in relation to the realignment of South Circular we can pick up on the actual site allocation. Question in relation to primary shopping areas, I think have been, and how those were identified, have been picked up in the employment and retail sessions. So I have no further questions on policy LCA 3. Just checking there aren't any other points before we move on. So moving on now to policy LCA 4 and the A21 corridor. Again, I'm conscious that Coverley Green Residents Association raised a point in relation to that, but I think that's linked into the discussion we've had about indicative heights. So just double checking, are you happy to sort of step back from that suggested modification?
Well, on that one, I think we feel there is still a relevance to the point we're making. In LCA 3, criterion F specifically addresses the relationship of new development to the Coverley Green Conservation Area to the south as one of the considerations. Whereas in LCA 4, there is no mention of any reference, no mention of the conservation area at all. There is no F, and criterion B does not cover that issue. Whereas, as has been established, Mr. Syme has accepted that the conservation area does actually extend into the allocation 22. It's not just setting, it's actually part of that site, and therefore we do feel that there should be reference to reflecting the heritage considerations in LCA 4.
Can I just ask for the council's view on that, please?
Yes, I think the participant makes a valid point that along the corridor of the A21, there are a number of conservation areas and heritage assets. So the council would be happy to insert a part E, which just references the heritage assets and the conservation areas, making sure that development responds positively to those.
Okay, thank you. So we'll keep that as an action point. Just in relation to modifications, my colleagues just pointed out that on LCA 3 we've missed one of the modifications because the mods are slightly out of order. So if you don't mind just returning to LCA 3 and proposed mod MO90 and no, sorry, MO241, I believe it is. Just to flag that up. If the council could, just remind me if I've missed any of the mods, that would be helpful because they're not necessarily in exact order on the schedule.
Thank you. Well spotted. So my apologies for missing that one. Yes, document PD11 modification MO241 relates to policy LC03. And okay, so the modification seeks to include an additional strategic policy reference under policy LCA3 that outlines the release of metropolitan open land at St Dunstan's playing fields, and that the precise extent of the metropolitan land boundary change will have regards to permanence in the long term. This is in relation to the proposed transport improvements to the South Circular Road and seeks to ensure that the new local plan clearly complies with, I think it's paragraph 145 of the National Planning Policy framework, and makes clear to readers and those considering the new local plan that 2 parcels of metropolitan open land are being de-designated.
Okay, that's fine, thank you. And in relation to just to double check, are there any further questions on LCA 4 at this point? Do you want to just put your nameplate down just to? Thank you. So just in terms of modifications, it's MO89, MO90. Which I think are duplicated. The modifications proposed to LCA 4, MO89 and MO90, there seem to be duplication.
Yes, that is correct. I cannot explain that, so my apologies for the duplication.
So is it just a drafting error?
That is correct.
Just to address the omission of number 4, Randallstown Road. Okay. Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions in terms of the overarching policies at this stage? LCA 1 to 4 concludes my questions. No? In that case, we shall move through the agenda and on to site allocation LCA 02 and Lewisham Shopping Centre. As I said at the introduction, I have seen all of the written reps, so I shall just, in order to make more efficient use of hearing time, be focusing on particular aspects of the site allocation, and obviously any representations that we have around the table. So bearing that in mind, in terms of the Lewisham Shopping Centre site, obviously it's a significant site allocation, a complex allocation. Has a master plan been prepared for the site, or is in one in preparation? And if so, what stage is that master plan at?
Yes, thank you. Yes, so we fundamentally agree that the site plays a vital role in contributing to the borough's spatial strategy. It is the missing jigsaw piece, as we call it, within the continued comprehensive redevelopment of Lewisham Town Centre and its transformation as a metropolitan centre. And I guess what we're trying to avoid here is piecemeal development that could prohibit successful placemaking. So we have got a policy within the draft local plan DM3 master plan and comprehensive development. And this essentially outlines that where a site allocation has been allocated within the site, within the local plan, but is not covered by a council endorsed master plan, that the onus is on the landowner to essentially prepare that master plan through the development management process. I think it's worth saying that this is a policy which we have carried forward from the Lewisham Town Centre local plan, policy LTC2, which provides a very similar approach. We believe that that approach is supported by existing national guidance. The National Design Guide states that, part of the components of good design is the layout or the master plan, and that should be established very early on in the process. So in terms of the status of the master plan, we've been engaged in pre-application process with Land Security through a year and a half now, looking at the comprehensive master plan for that site allocation. Landsec, as the principal land owners of the site, have been progressing that with the council. That will then form part of a submission which is expected in the early autumn of this year, and the council will consider that master plan as part of the outline planning application and the detailed plots that will be submitted as well. That is when the council will make a decision at committee whether it is supportive of the master plan, supportive of the outline planning application, and supportive of the 2 detailed plots. Once in place, that master plan will guide kind of future development on the site. I think it's worth also saying that this is not an unusual situation. So it is a process which we have as a council, done for a number of our strategic sites, Cannon Wharf, Plough Way, for example, up in the north of the borough, which is now completed. Again, strategic site, multiple landowners, where the master plan was developed through the pre-application process. Likewise, Convoys Wharf, Deptford Timber Yard, the majority of our strategic sites all have an accompanying master plan with them.
And has that emerging master plan, has it or will it be subject to public consultation as a part of the planning application process?
Yes, so the master plan through kind of pre-application consultation that Land Securities are undertaken has been through public consultation. I may leave the details to Land Securities to provide.
I am conscious that you wish to speak, but if you don't mind, I'm going to bring in Landsec first, just if you could advise us at what stage that master planning process is at, would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, as Mr. Simons set out, we've actually, believe it or not, it's 2 years pre-application that we started summer 2022, and throughout that process, obviously the starting point for the site was a master planning process in terms of design, and that's been through 2 main rounds of public consultation. First in October 2023, and secondly in May and June of this year. There's also been sort of significant further engagement on that master plan with statutory consultees such as the GLA, Environment Agency, Historic England, as well as separate sort of public consultations with local stakeholder groups, design champions. So it's been through a thorough round of consultation through sort of developer-led process.
We'll come on to sort of what that master plan is showing, and in terms of what's being proposed later on. But did you wish to raise an issue in relation to the sort of master planning process itself?
Yes, Madam, thank you. Just to note that in the council's hearing statement at 1729(2, it says that the master plan is in the process of being prepared for the site in accordance with the policy requirement. We don't accept at all that the process that is being undertaken is compliant with the emerging policy. Perhaps most obviously, you'll know that there is a requirement for parties to work in partnership. That hasn't occurred at all. Neither do we accept that Landsec have actively engaged with us. As you'll see from our hearing statement, we haven't been consulted and we haven't had the chance to input into the master plan. And insofar as it's said, well, there's been, pre-application consultation generally, there is obviously an obvious difference between Landsec presenting everybody with what they desire in terms of the master plan, as opposed to working with us to develop the master plan for the site allocation as a whole. As you'll have understood, I have quite a lot more to say about the master plan, but I'm happy to come back to that as and when is most convenient.
Okay, thank you. It touches on a question later on in the agenda in terms of how the council ensures a comprehensive approach to the to the site allocation, bringing forward the site, and obviously that the land ownership goes beyond the Landsec ownership. So how does the council see bringing forward the comprehensive regeneration of the site, including all partners and landowners? Just picking up the point raised.
Yeah, we certainly want to facilitate that conversation, and we have had pre-app discussions on Lewisham House, and we are happy to facilitate a kind of workshop between the 2 parties. I think what I'd quite like to understand is in terms of the participants'
objection in terms of a matter of soundness to the local plan itself, whether they are objecting to the master plan process that we're going through, the development management process, or whether they have a fundamental objection to DM3 and the local plan itself. Because I do think we need to distinguish and be careful that we're not straying into discussions which should be better resolved through the development management process.
Would you like to respond to that?
Thank you, Madam. In response to that, just to clarify exactly what our objection is, if I could just take a couple of moments. So, as you all have understood, Lewisham House is an existing 20-story building. Our client has a 999-year lease with development rights, and its intention is to retain the existing building and to refurbish it for co-living, which would deliver the equivalent of approximately 200 residential units. We have been actively engaging in pre-application discussions with the council and preparing that scheme. We had a formal pre-application meeting in March, and as we explain in the hearing statement, operators and funding partners are being finalised, and the intention is to submit the planning application later this year. And very importantly, in terms of why our client is objecting to the draft plan, our aspiration is to implement and to occupy our scheme within the next 5 years. So we say that we can deliver the refurbished building early. It's correct, of course, that Landsec is the freeholder, but we are clear that we can bring forward our scheme without needing any assistance from any compulsory purchase process. So that's the background. We obviously need to apply for full planning permission because it's a co-living proposal, not sort of straightforward C3 residential use, but we don't understand there to be an objection to the principle of co-living from the council or indeed from Landsec, who are including co-living as part of their master plan. And so our overarching position on the draft site allocation is that it should facilitate rather than obstruct early delivery of Lewisham House. You'll be aware of the council's performance against the housing delivery target. Also importantly, but a point that is being overlooked with respect by the council, Land Security can't bring forward their master plan at the moment without resorting to the compulsory purchase process, because obviously they can't take forward their proposals for Lewisham House without us agreeing to that. So that's the background. But in terms of what we say the difficulties are with the site allocation, in short, there's no justification, we say, for requiring our scheme to have to progress through a master plan process. That's the first point. And secondly, we say that if a master plan process is to be followed, then it should be a proper council-led approach and not the approach that's currently being put forward in the site allocation policy and supported by DM3. Just to clarify the nature of the objection in relation to the second point and why the master planning approach we say is unsound, it's not clear reading the site allocation policy and DM3 together whether what the council wants is the first applicant who comes forward comes with a master plan for the entire site allocation, and then thereafter all other applicants for other parts of the site application have to follow that master plan, or whether actually it's open to later applicants to come forward with their own master plans, obviously taking into account what's already happened on the site. The site allocation policy in the first development requirement appears to contemplate a single master plan at the outset, but then the cross-reference to DM3 instead appears to contemplate that it will be open to each applicant whose site forms part of a site allocation to put forward their own master plan. So that's not clear. That's the first problem. Next, if what the council wants perhaps understandably, is for there to be a one-time master planning process at the outset for the site allocation. That process should be led by the council and not by whichever applicant for part of the site allocation is able to come forward first, because you'll have seen that DM3 only requires the master planning applicant to engage actively with other occupiers and owners. There's no requirement for all of the parties to agree on a master plan between themselves. And so you could have the first applicant, whether that's Landsec or someone else, come forward with a master plan that's completely incompatible with all other proposals for the site allocation, and then say, well, never mind, you know, Lewisham House can't do what they would like to do, but we've engaged actively with them, and so tough, you know, we're carrying on. The difficulty with that approach in terms of soundness is it doesn't promote swift delivery of the allocation. It frustrates delivery of the allocation because it increases the likelihood that resort will have to be had to compulsory purchase powers, potentially unsuccessfully. I should have added, we don't accept that there has been lots of reference to the potential to resort to compulsory purchase powers, but we say we have an obvious alternative in relation to Lewisham House, and so actually it's doubtful that a compulsory purchase order would be confirmed. But that's the difficulty.
Sorry, can I just stop you there? I think we're straying into sort of some of the details here. You seem to be treading a fine line in terms of you know, saying that you haven't been included as part of the master plan, but saying also that actually you could run ahead of the whole master planning process. It's, you know, it's quite an independent site. So I think you're treading a bit of a fine line there. I think in terms of the point you've raised there in terms of development requirement 1, I think that is a valid point in terms of the wording of the policy. To state landowners must work in partnership in accordance with the master plan to ensure appropriate coordination, phasing and balance of uses across the site, which is obviously the wider site allocation. That does imply coordination of a master plan for the whole site, not just on specific parts of the site. So I think that, you know, that is a point in terms of the wording and possible confusion in terms of development requirement 1. We'll pick up the other points raised in a moment, but I'd like to hear the council's view on that, please.
Obviously, we'll be guided by the inspectors and on their view on that, but I think the aspiration is there that the council would like, through this process, for landowners to work in partnership to develop an agreed master plan for the sites. It's again, I would say a tried and tested approach that we have done in the past. Now, there may be situations, you know, again, I don't want to get into too much detail and stray into development management process, but there may be situations where landowners or leaseholder landowners don't agree. And the question is, how then do we deal with that? But just to address the point that, you know, that the council should be taking forward the master plan approach. I just referenced the MPPF paragraph 128, which looks at preparing design guides or codes. And it does make the reference that effectively those codes could be prepared by development partners. It doesn't necessarily have to be prepared by the council. And again, going back to a previous conversation that we've had, we have over 50% of our sites, 75 sites, which, you know, are not covered by master plans and are and therefore we need to find a mechanism, an effective mechanism to develop a master plan through the development management process.
I think it just comes back to the wording. I mean, obviously, it's the council's plan. The council's promoting the site allocation. You know, that is in the council's local plan. So it's the council's site allocation. And development requirement 1 is quite clear about working in landowners working in partnership. and ensuring appropriate coordination phasing of uses across the site, which relates to site allocation as a whole. So I think there is a little bit of tension there in between that and DM3. I think that is a valid point in terms of being clear and effective, so developers know what's expected of them. And how would the council ensure that the vision for the town centre is delivered across the whole site, and that the various developments coming forward to contribute to the overall vision and strategy for the town centre. And I think it is a point in terms of the wording of Development Requirement 1. And obviously in relation to, say, Catford, there has been a master planning process led by the council on that. Why is the council taking a different approach on this site?
I think obviously we have got the Lewisham Town Centre local plan, which is an adopted local plan which provides a broad framework for the development of Lewisham Town Centre, but didn't include this site. As I said, this site is the missing jigsaw piece. Nevertheless, we still contend that it is a valid process to work with the principal landowner, who does own the majority of the site, to work with them to develop a master plan through the pre-application process. I think there's enough flexibility within the allocation to allow other landowners and other interests to come forward within that site allocation, within the framework that will be set by that master plan.
Presumably, though, the master plan being prepared by the principal landowner doesn't necessarily cover the entire town centre, or does it?
No, just the site allocation.
So it would include land ownership beyond their own ownership, is that right?
Correct, yes.
So given that, I think the point therefore is that Lewisham House don't feel as though they've been part of that process, is that right? Which to a degree is slightly beyond our remit. It's we have to concentrate on how things are set out in the plan itself. But I think it might be useful just to say if an application came forward for Lewisham House, how would that be dealt with in the as a part of the DM process within the context of the plan? And how is Lewisham House addressed in the overarching master plan? Can I just I'm going to start with the council on that, because it is your plan.
Yes, I mean, in terms of the emerging master plan that is being prepared through the pre-application process by Land Securities, it does also suggest the retention of Lewisham House and the refurbishment of Lewisham House for residential development. It suggests non-residential ground floor, which we would expect within our primary kind of core shopping area. And so I think in both cases we're saying, and obviously I don't want to put words, but in both instances we're saying that this is a developable site. Lewisham Shopping Centre in its entirety is a developable site, and both participants are saying that the components are deliverable, particularly within the first 5 years, which is, from a council's point of view, fantastic. I think the only point of divergence, as I recall, is that the Land Security Master Plan is seeking to optimise site capacity, and therefore has an additional development block which adjoins the Lewisham House master, the refurbished Lewisham House essentially, and contribute significantly to, optimizing that site capacity. Whereas I think the leaseholders are essentially saying that would be a freestanding element which is delivered without the additionality in terms of optimizing the site. That is factually where we are in terms of the discussions through the development management process. Again, I don't want to stray too much into kind of pre-application conversations, but that is factually where we are.
I'm just trying to get to the bottom of the objection, to the plan, to the actual plan policy for the site allocation and the wording of that. I think obviously there's a lot of discussions going on behind the scenes in terms of the master plan and maybe his concerns with the master plan, but in terms, I have to try and pull it back to the actual site allocation and objections to that. And I think, we need to try and confine our discussions to that if we can. Did you want to clarify anything?
Madam, yes, thank you. I entirely understand that, and although I just wanted to make clear that we don't agree with what the council said in its hearing statement, but other than that, I appreciate that whether the master plan that's coming forward is good, bad or indifferent is not a matter for you. But the issues that do go to the soundness of the policy, as I've said, are it allows an approach that enables the first applicant through the door, in effect, to impose their scheme on everybody else, and that we say is within your remit because it's unsound as an approach. And then I took my two main points in reverse order, which probably wasn't very sensible. But the first one is that on the facts here, the blanket requirement that comes through the site allocation policy in coupled with DM3, the blanket requirement that anybody seeking to develop, redevelop or refurbish within the site allocation must master plan the entire site allocation, we say is unnecessary and unsound here because the building's already there. Landsec can master plan around it. It's not, I mean, I completely appreciate the concern around piecemeal development, but the major difficulty with that occurs when you have several site owners. It's not known what the proposals will be and you don't know what heights you'll be juggling, but we're not proposing materially to alter the size of the building or to add floors to it. So we say quite simply that there is no justification for requiring our scheme to await the master planning process. It will unnecessarily delay the scheme coming forward. And I noted in its Reg 19 response, for your note, the reference is page 239. The council makes the point that applications rarely come in as full applications and as part of its justification for the master planning approach. Well, we are proposing to come in as a full application. And so the simple point is that we suggest there should be an amendment to the policy that gives the council a discretion to waive the master planning requirement, where, for example, the application relates to the change of use of an existing building and isn't seeking materially to increase its size. So that's our other objection, is we say it's unsound to oblige our scheme and our application to sit behind the master planning process when the building's there and everybody can master plan around that, and there is no sound basis for delaying what could be swift delivery early in the plan. Just before I be quiet and allow others to respond, on this issue around additionality or optimizing of the site, we don't accept that the site allocation overall could not be optimized whilst retaining the existing building. There isn't any evidence, for example, that the floor space couldn't be redistributed. And so we don't agree with the council's premise that we should be, doing more with our building in order to optimise the site allocation overall. That hasn't been evidenced at this stage in the process.
Just coming back to your point about whoever the first applicant is, would develop the master plan. And in terms of soundness of the plan, the plan doesn't actually say that, though, does it? Development Requirement 1 just states landowners must work in partnership in accordance with the master plan. It doesn't necessarily say whoever submits first application. That may be how it's worked, but that it doesn't, in terms of the soundness of the plan, that the plan policy doesn't actually say that. It just states landowners must work in partnership. I mean, I will come back. Allow the council to respond to the points raised, but in terms of this point that that every applicant should prepare a master plan, would that necessarily be the case? When the council are assessing a planning application, that if Lewisham House came forward before the wider master plan for the town centre, could the council deal with that just on its own merits?
We certainly could, but in terms of just picking up the point about master planning and that if it's an existing building, there is no requirement for a master plan, then I think the question is then how do we know how the building responds to any future redevelopment of the site? And again, without getting into too much detail, a refurbished Lewisham House does need to work pretty hard in terms of ground floor uses, for example. It needs to address the the northern square that is being proposed in the master plan. If we have an application which comes in and doesn't respond to an overarching master plan, what we could have is issues of dead frontage, that type of thing, addressing principal kind of public spaces that we're trying to create in the town centre. So I think there does need to be coordination between landowners at the kind of pre-application stage, which is why we do have the statement in there that says they should be working in partnership. Unfortunately, we may. And as I said, we've done this time and time again where we have been successful in terms of getting parties to work together to an agreed position. There will be times where that's not possible, and then the council will have to make a decision based on the planning policies which are in play at the time as to whether or not they can support the application or not.
Okay, thank you. I think again, there's obviously a lot of discussion, negotiation behind the scenes that I'm not party to in terms of the applications and the master planning process. But I have to sort of come back to the plan. And clearly, Development Requirement 1 requires landowners to work in partnership. Whether that's actually happening on the ground is a matter. Obviously, Lewisham House don't feel that that's necessarily the case, but it's difficult for me to go there because there's obviously the requirements in the policy. From what you've said as well, it wouldn't necessarily prevent an application coming forward. You would have to consider that on its merits. In terms of the point about the ground floor frontages, for example, Development Guideline 1430 refers to the need for positive and active ground floor frontages. So maybe that there are enough, guidelines, requirements within the policy to consider an application outside of the master planning process should it come forward in the meantime. Just conscious Landsec have been patient there. Do you want to come in and address any of those points?
I'm minded not to sort of get into a detailed discussion about particular challenges from the Lewisham House team. Just as I think a general overview of where we're at. We're the major landowner. We own about 80% of the freehold of the site that we're master planning. But as is inevitable in town centre locations, there's lots of other landowners as well. And Lewisham House is one of the largest of those, but not the largest, depending on how you would like to calculate that. There are freeholders, long leaseholders, occupational interests across the site, as you would expect, across a site that was assembled from a historic town centre in the 1970s. Just on the specific point of our consultation process, partly because there are a lot of landowners involved, with some very minor interests and some larger interests. All landowners have been invited both main phases of consultation, and the Lewisham House team have taken us up in both of those circumstances. I've met them physically to go over our plans in our consultation shop in both rounds. And we've never received any specific comments on the master plan, I would say, asking for any changes. We understood for a long time that the two previous prior approval consents for that building, for change use to that building, were being pursued. It's only quite recently that we understand a new full application is likely to come in for a different use. We haven't seen anything of that, so we can't really respond to that. Although to try and aid the conversation about piecemeal or able to be developed in parallel, we have provided a pack to planners and to the Lewisham House team, trying to provide some analysis of that, and we're waiting for their feedback. So I think we have consulted in a way that is manageable and reasonable in the context of a very, very large site with very complex development proposals to be built out of a number of phases across a number of land ownership boundaries. That's just a bit of context. Whether that goes to the application of the policy or whether the policy is sound itself, obviously, is for this forum to decide. And just a very, very generic point, really, about master planning itself. I've worked in a number of town centres across London trying to do similar things, and comprehensive development policies are pretty standard, and I think, and also necessary, because you will never come across a town centre, certainly like this, where there's a single land ownership. It doesn't exist, or if you did, you would be being land-led in your approach to the best master plan outcome rather than being design-led, and that's the approach that we took, and we think that is necessary, consistent with previous policy, and consistent with all successful town centre regen schemes, certainly that I've come across in London. Just one last point on delivery, because I guess that does go to the policy a bit. There was a comment made earlier that CPO may be necessary because of land ownership issues in relation to this particular plot. We potentially agree with that. Unfortunately, we'd like to acquire it without that, or find some other structure to deliver our master plan over that piece of land without resorting to those powers. But we don't agree that the now fallen away prior approval consents or any future standalone consent can be implemented without acquiring additional land or rights, probably through CPO either. And we've previously provided, quite a long time ago, legal advice to the Lewisham House team, setting out why we believe that's the case, and we haven't had a response to that. So we don't agree with the point on deliverability. We don't think the plot should be developed on its own in terms of comprehensiveness. We don't believe it can be developed on its own in terms of comprehensiveness. So I think there's a bit of again, we don't want to draw this forum into the details of ownership discussions, but in any event, something needs to unlock, I would say, ownerships, however the various plots of land come forward. So I think that's probably all I want to say.
Did you wish to comment on that?
Just one final point, if I may, Madam. Just in response to the council's answer to you, which was that they could deal with Lewisham House first if it came forward on its own merits. I mean, unless I'm completely misunderstanding the draft policy, if it's adopted, then the first development requirement will require us to work in partnership with the other landowners. So it is going, in effect, to require Lewisham House, as I said earlier, to await the master planning process. And I think the other point, which also relates to the council's point about, well, what about, having an acceptable ground floor frontage and interacting with public open spaces and all the rest of it? I mean, you made the point, Madam, that there are other development requirements that we would have to satisfy if we came forward independently. One of the issues, I think, is that, as we explained in our hearing statement, it could be that a degree of master planning would be beneficial in terms of master planning principles in relation to design, but the draft policy goes too far in that it essentially hands other landowners or applicants, in essence, a veto over more fundamental issues such as the land use that's appropriate in a particular part of the site. So it could be that there's a lesser form of master planning that would be beneficial, but we remain of the view that what's proposed goes too far. The only point I wanted to make in response to Landsec is that, you know, there's clearly a disagreement between us and them as to whether we can bring forward our scheme without having to, you know, or whether Landsec has a veto over our scheme as the landlord. But what is clear is that unless we agree to sell our interest in the building, Landsec will have to get a CPO. There's no debate about that.
So Landsec are the freehold and Lewisham House, you own the leasehold, is that right? Okay.
On
I would just like to ask the council to respond. Clearly, Lewisham House is a, you know, it's a building in its own right, but there are other land ownerships within the town centre, which was raised by Landsec, and you know, along the high street, for example. So it comes back to the point as to whether there is a need for that overarching master plan and how all of those different land interests could be brought together, if you like, to deliver the overall vision.
I mean, I think you know, we've obviously been working with the majority landowner for 2 years now on the site, and we've reached a position where you know, officers are happy with the master planning principles and the approach. And I want to make clear, it is the principles that we will be effectively approving if we do approve the planning application that we are expecting in early autumn from Land Securities. Now, there then may come, you know, be separate applications that come forward, and the council will then be looking at those overall principles. Does those individual elements and components that are coming forward contribute to the placemaking? And you know, again, these are not hugely complicated kind of placemaking principles around, you know, positive frontages onto principal squares that are being created, creating kind of key routes, etc., through the site. So once that master plan, or you know, even if we have an application that is side by side, I think we can assess that. But the question is, can a comprehensive, given the location of Lewisham House and given its complexity in the master plan and given its scale, can Lewisham House be delivered by the leaseholders? Question one, in terms of deliverability. That might not be for this discussion, but is something that the council is mindful of. But can it be done to optimise the capacity of the site and also respond to those key fundamental principles that we believe and Landsec believe are essential to create a good place? And those are the question. But I don't think that fundamentally questions the soundness of creating a master plan approach to avoid piecemeal development for our site allocations.
So just thinking about how the policy will be used. So say if a planning application for Lewisham House came in advance of the master planning process, would criterion 1 or development requirement 1 be used as a reason for refusal?
I think we'd have to look at what we're trying to create, particularly because we are in kind of advanced pre-application discussions, you know, in terms of the timing of the exact submissions of the application. Again, you know, that's probably beyond this discussion, but there are probably other principles that we could look at in terms of the site allocation to effectively assess an application should it come in before the master plan.
No, when we discussed the, the difference between development requirements and development guidelines, the council's answer to that question was that a development requirement is a necessity. And if that's the case, that would imply that the council would potentially use development requirement 1 to refuse a permission which came in advance of a master planning process. And I guess my question, my section 78 hat on is how, whether it would hold up, if you like, as a reason for refusal in terms of the prematurity argument.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you'll be better versed than me in terms of the MPPF and the high bar that's set for, the threshold of prematurity. We'd have to look at that on a case-by-case basis, as we have done in kind of other applications. Nevertheless, I do fundamentally believe that the idea of comprehensive master planning and creating good places, it's essential to have a policy which, again, supported by the National Design Guide and its principles and components of good design, leads with comprehensive master planning at its heart.
Okay, thank you. Did you wish to make a further point? I think after you've made that point, I think we will need to move on. Obviously, we've heard the arguments on both sides.
That's understood, Madam. I'm grateful. I mean, just to observe that the council clearly has just said it's looking for overall master planning principles, but that is nowhere reflected in the policy wording itself, because when we turn to DM3, which is the master planning policy, it talks about a detailed site-wide master plan. I don't know, it may well be that if the policy were less onerous in its requirements in terms of master planning, my client might not have such an objection to it if what is sought is just master planning, placemaking principles and good design. I'm sure all of those objectives are supported by my client, but if that's what the council seeks to secure, then the policy isn't appropriately worded in terms of attaining its outcome and only its outcome. And with respect to the council, we didn't get a clear answer on how development requirement 1 would be used and whether that would be a reason for refusal. So I remain of the view that it is problematic in that it would essentially stack any Lewisham House application behind the master plan process, which at the moment is being led, it would seem, wholly by Landsec.
Would the council like to respond to that in particular in relation to the relationship with DM3, policy DM3?
I don't think the council has anything further to add than we've already said. Again, we'll be guided by the inspectors on this matter.
I was just looking at the wording of policy DM3, which says the development proposal must be accompanied by a site master plan, where they form all a part of a site allocation. So would that mean a site master plan for just the site or for the site allocation?
Yes, part A basically says development proposals must be accompanied by a site master plan where they form all or parts of the site allocation or in other circumstances specified by the local plan.
I'm not sure that couldn't be taken both ways, because a site master plan could be just in relation to the site subject to the planning application potentially. But then it does go on to state where they form all a part of a site allocation but it just states so it must be accompanied by a site master plan, which would indicate to me just the actual site itself. There could be, well, we'll be coming on to DM3. We may need to look at the wording of that, but you know, what's the intention? What's the intention of the council in relation to that policy?
I mean, the fundamental intention, which is why we have, you know, particularly in the Lewisham Shopping Centre, but other sites, included a more or a wider red line boundary, is, as I've said, to avoid piecemeal development, to have an overarching master plan that guides good design and good urban planning.
Is the intention of DM3 to require a master plan for the whole allocation as opposed to just the site itself? Because I think it's not that clear.
We can certainly take that away and look at the wording and make sure. And I appreciate that we are going to talk about this policy in detail at a future hearing.
Because I think that to a degree determines how criterion 1 of the site allocation policy would be used, because it cross-refers to policy DM3. So I think there is an effectiveness point there in terms of what is actually required, and so that developers are clear as to the requirement of the policy.
Yes, we can take a look at that. Again, what I don't want to do is agree to something, particularly now, that the council would not be comfortable with. Again, our position is clear that what we're trying to avoid here is piecemeal development and development that doesn't contribute to successful placemaking. So, you know, whether the wording needs to be kind of amended, we can consider, but I'm just conscious that we might need to reflect on that.
I think the councils also need to carefully consider, you know, how that policy is going to be used as well in terms of the implementation at, you know, for planning applications, and whether it would use Development Requirement 1 in the way in which it's intended, and whether the council thinks that would stand up effectively at, you know, at an appeal, for example, on a Section 78 case. So I think that needs some consideration, because it just, with my other hat on, it flags up an issue, I think, in terms of how that would be interpreted. Okay, thank you. I think we've probably discussed that as far as we can, and we will take a view on that. There were some other questions, though. I think, you know, given it is a major allocation and a complex scheme, I would like to explore the other matters as well. And how were the proposed mix of uses determined, and is the approach to defining site capacities for each land use robust and realistic? And it's something I don't think the council's response in its statement particularly addressed in a site-specific way. So if the council, I'll ask the council to start, given that's a council site allocation. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. So in terms of the site allocation or the indicative capacities of the site allocation as set out in the Regulation 19, this was done on a theoretical basis at that point, given that we hadn't advanced through the kind of pre-application process to a stage where the council we're comfortable with the master plan and outline planning application that was coming forward. So what we did was we applied density assumptions based on the methodology set out in the site allocation background paper, and also the site assessments Appendix C. That looked at obviously the criteria outlined in the London SHLA, identifying this site as an opportunity area, central location, PTAL 6, and therefore generated a density at the maximum of 450 dwellings per hectare. We also looked at then the non-residential uses and using a kind of percentage mix, whilst also looking at the existing non-residential uses within the town centre, which was developed in-house by colleagues looking at floor space, but also through the master plan process in detail that Land Securities had done, looking at the existing non-residential floor space. To come up with the indicative capacities outlined within the Regulation 19 document. So that was 1,579 net residential units, approximately 20,000 square metres of employment floor space, which includes office, and then 60,000 gross main town centre floor space, which includes all other town centre uses essentially. I think as we were discussing through the examination in public, we are at a position where the council is supportive of the Land Securities master plan and outline planning application as it's coming forward. I appreciate this is a bit of a dynamic situation, but we've suggested an increase in the net residential units, and I think the exact figure is emerging. My figure that I quoted was 2,150, which is the figure that's in the trajectory at the moment, and the figure that is in the updates that Angela has provided the inspectors. In terms of non-residential floor space, I think the council accepts that there needs to be again a kind of a reworking of that non-residential floor space to reflect the actual capacities that are being delivered through the outline planning through the future outline planning application through the master planning process, which is likely to result in somewhere in the region of 65 to 70,000 square metres of non-residential floor space across the site allocation, as opposed to the 80,000 square metres. And this is a simple, as I've explained previously, generally we see in terms of the indicative capacities that the residential goes up and the non-residential goes down, but it's also through the thorough testing of the master plan process. I think it's fair to say that we've pushed very hard in terms of the non-residential floor space that we can accommodate within the master planning process, and we believe that that type of range, that 65 to 70,000 non-residential is probably what we can fit on the site.
Okay, so the increased capacities, does that come through the sort of more detailed master planning process? But I suppose my question is obviously thinking about your comments earlier about, you know, Lewisham being a metropolitan centre, looking at, and I appreciate that the criteria for designating a metropolitan centre may need to change, reflecting the sort of current retail sector. But how does the reduction in town centre uses and employment uses sit in terms of ensuring that Lewisham is still a destination for comparison shopping, that it would, how would it sit with the council's ambitions to be, you know, metropolitan centre? Just those are the sorts of questions going around in my mind, thinking about the increased residential capacities on the site.
I think it's a fair question, and obviously there is through through the kind of development management process, there's always a kind of balance, particularly when we have a finite amount of land. We also have, you know, a significant need for housing as well within our town centre. And within Lewisham overall. In terms of how the 65 to 70k of non-residential floor space would match up to existing, I think the existing, and I'm looking at colleagues here, is around about 60,000 square metres of non-residential floor space. So, you know, we accept that might only be a small increase, but there are vacant units, etc., as well, which no doubt Land Securities will respond to. I think also we need to consider the overall quantum or increase in non-residential floor space across the town centre more generally. So, for example, Lewisham Gateway, which provides significant non-residential floor space uplift, had no non-residential floor space because it was essentially a roundabout with a bus layover at the time. Likewise, Lewisham Renaissance, etc. So there has been an increase in the overall town centre uses within Lewisham town centre, which you know, hopefully can get us to that point where we can have the discussion with the GLA about what it means in a future metropolitan centre to have that kind of regional draw. And then with the Lewisham shopping centre, I think there has to be a degree of pragmatism as well through the kind of pre-application process. As I said, we have pushed very hard for non-residential floor space, and you know, every ground and the majority of first floor is now non-residential floor space. So we, you know, again, we're trying to accommodate as much non-residential floor space and town centre floor space as possible.
I think I mean, obviously I have to think about the plan as a whole and the overall strategy, and to make sure there aren't tensions within the plan. And obviously we've considered the economy and retail sort of town centre capacities and policies. And it's just making sure really that the overall strategy, the plan joins up. I think it would be useful to know, on the basis of the current figures that we're looking at with the increased densities, to have an updated figure in terms of the net capacity of the existing non-town centre uses, and I think it would be useful to have that broken down into retail and other town centre uses, and the proposed town, you know, non-retail uses, again broken down into retail and then other town centre uses. I think that would be really helpful. I think you know, I appreciate the council's in a difficult position, and it struck us really when reading the plan that there is a danger that residential development would just, you know, could just take over, and you know, in its entirety, and there's a need also to provide employment and to provide retail and services as well. So, but I appreciate the plan's treading a fine line, I think, on that. Yes.
Yes, as hopefully a helpful footnote to this matter, you mentioned, Inspector Malloy, some of the discussions that we had during week 2 around town centre and main town centre use demand and projections. One of the actions that the council has taken away from that week 2, is seeking to provide the inspectors with further intelligence, more up-to-date intelligence on demand, and indeed the increasing demand in places like Lewisham and Catford post-COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you.
And I think just to echo your thought, it is about that balance, and I appreciate that we do need to consider the plan overall. I mean, we do think that the emerging figures coming from the 2 years of work that we've done with Land Securities does represent, a very successful or could represent a very successful redevelopment of the shopping centre, and it is, maintaining that core retail function and, a central shopping centre at its core, which, Landsec, are very much promoting.
Okay, thank you. Did Landsec wish to come in at this point?
Thank you. Yes. Just, I suppose, first point to make is just to note that Mr. Simon's correct in the sort of the proposed floor space figures and residential unit numbers within the master plan. That is where the master plan is currently sitting. Just in terms of the existing shopping centre and indeed the whole sort of site allocation, there's probably around about 80,000 square metres of floor space within that as it stands. That's not just the shopping centre, that's the whole site allocation too. Within that, there's around about 30,000, which is vacant, unused, unusable, or long term. Just hasn't been any kind of active use for 20 or 30 years. So in terms of actual active supporting the functioning of the shopping centre, there's about 50,000 square metres within the whole site allocation at the moment. And as Mr. Simon set out, the master plan currently sits about 65 to 70,000 square metres of town centre floor space. So we do feel we are bettering the on-the-ground situation, and certainly we can't see of that vacant floor space within the centre at the moment. That is not going to be converted into active, useful floor space in any likelihood in its current state.
Okay, thank you. And just to ask the council, reference was made to sort of quite significant vacancies there. Is that just a symptom of the current retail climate, or is it to do also with the type of units that are being provided at present not matching sort of modern day requirements, as it were?
I think it's probably fair to say it's a little bit of both. There is a need to diversify the town centre offer. There is a need to improve the quality of the offer, and there's definitely a component of the kind of changing retail demands, which is why we have reflected a kind of the flexibility within the plan in terms of town centre uses, albeit we are wanting, and I know we are going to provide some further evidence on this, but within our primary shopping area, we are seeking 50% retail, and I believe Land Securities are happy with that, and indeed some of those comparison retailers that are considered as anchors, and also the other convenience retail, Sainsbury's, for example, which again is considered as anchors, will be retained and need to be retained in terms of creating a successful shopping environment, shopping centre in the future.
Okay, thank you. I am conscious of time. In relation to potential adverse impacts of developing the site, I think I'll phrase a question like this. Are there any potential constraints which can't be overcome through the planning process, would cause difficulties or otherwise affect viability of the site?
No, from a council's perspective, we haven't got any evidence that there is anything fundamental which would fundamentally affect the developability of the site. Clearly, it's a complex site. Clearly, there are going to be significant costs associated with redeveloping a scheme of this nature, which again will be considered through the development management process.
Okay, thank you. Anything in terms of constraints or highways issues?
Just to say that in the latest version of the IIA, that they did look at the Lewisham Shopping Centre site and the uplifted figures, and they did suggest that ongoing scrutiny would be needed for that site. So not necessarily that there's any implications arising from it, just because of the actual uplift in the actual numbers. It would be useful to monitor what will be happening with the site.
Yes, I did wonder what ongoing scrutiny meant in terms of the, this plan process. Did the IIA have concerns, but potential impacts?
I mean, I don't think there was any specific concerns. Obviously, there are issues which would be kind of normal in a complex town centre site. Obviously, we are adjacent to the River Ravensbourne, and there will be issues that we have to deal with in terms of consultation with the Environment Agency, looking at flooding, for example. But all of this is, fairly, I say fairly straightforward in terms of a complex town centre site.
So even smaller sites aren't necessarily straightforward, are they? Just in terms of potential highway implications, I did wonder whether there are any specific or sort of critical schemes which are required, which may be in the IDP, for example, to facilitate the redevelopment of the town site, or which maybe the town centre redevelopment may be dependent on.
There's no significant public highways works. There will be, as is the case with any site allocation, probably improvements to particular junctions, etc. Obviously, we'll be reconfiguring the arrangements of servicing and etc. But there is no strategic infrastructure requirement to deliver the site.
Yeah, it's quite contained in a way, isn't it, the site? Yes, did you wish to?
Like, it's probably worth saying something about delivery from our perspective, just to say that we've made a big commitment. We've owned the shopping centre for 20 years. We've been committed to the area for a long time. We've invested an awful lot of money to get the plan to this far. If we didn't believe it was deliverable, then we wouldn't have proceeded to this point. The specifics around infrastructure are complex, but normal, whatever that means for development at this scale. Anything to do with highways, utilities, and so on, that's necessary for the scheme to come forward will be delivered by us as ultimately as part of any planning permission that we're able to receive. So there's no third-party infrastructure project that is needed to unlock this site. It's all subject to other statutory consents and so on. It's all stuff that we would deliver either directly or through 106 or other funding.
In terms of the discussions we've had about the current sort of retail climate, I'll start with the council first, but is the approach for the comprehensive redevelopment of the site justified and deliverable in the current economic climate? Is there a risk? Is the demand there for the redevelopment?
We certainly believe so. That is evident in the ongoing redevelopment elsewhere within the town centre and the occupation of ground floor non-residential elements. Lewisham Gateway, for example, have got a number of non-residential floor space occupiers who are very keen and signed up to occupying those ground floor uses. Again, this feels like the missing piece within the comprehensive redevelopment of Lewisham Town Centre. it does need to diversify in its offer. It does need to improve the quality of that kind of retail town centre uses. But we are confident, and Land Securities are very confident that there is that demand and need there.
I'm assuming by your presence that you do agree that there is the demand there. Just briefly, because I'm concerned about time.
Yeah, I mean, just back to the sort of vacant floor space point. Almost all ground floor space within the shopping centre and the wider area is fully occupied at the minute. The structural vacancy issue is upper floors, which are wrongly configured, frequently oversized or inaccessible. We're a very, I mean, this aside from residential uses, predominantly this is a retail scheme. We're one of the biggest retail investor landlords in the country, and we've done our research, so we think this is the right size. We've got brands that would like to come back to Lewisham today. We just can't offer them the configuration and format of unit that they would like, and this scheme will unpick that problem. So yeah, we're very confident this is the right mix and quantum of development to optimise the site.
Okay, thanks. Moving on to deliverability. How would the site be phased? How does the council envisage the site coming forward, given the complex nature of the site and also the presence of existing users? I suppose I'm struggling to see how that's all going to work out, particularly in the time frame suggested.
Yes, I mean, obviously, all the site allocations, and this may be a recurring theme, are complex site allocations and have their complexity in terms of delivery and phasing. The current proposals for the phasing is to start at the northern end of the master plan, which requires less intervention in terms of the actual reconfiguration and demolition of the shopping centre in itself. There are two plots that Landsec are looking at in terms of a detailed application. So the application will be a hybrid application looking at two detailed plots and an outline planning application for the rest of their site. And those detailed plots, as I said, are in more discrete locations to the north, which Land Securities are the landowners of. We're working through how that reconfiguration effectively impacts and touches the existing shopping centre. Obviously, you can imagine that that is fairly complex, but Land Securities, who have done this many times before, are providing us with the evidence to demonstrate that it can be delivered. And as you say, we have got the first two plots that Land Security have in the 5-year land supply. We've got a statement of common ground with Landsec. They are confident that can be delivered. We are confident that can be delivered also. It is likely that there may be some additional earlier phases, which may be non-residential, but again, this is being developed through kind of the development management process, and there's probably, dare I say, a little bit too much detail in terms of the local plan process. It is likely that the central part of the master plan, which is the principal shopping centre, will be the last phase to be delivered, and that reflects servicing requirements, leaseholds, that type of thing, and also just the complexity of that central piece.
And obviously, we need to test the deliverability of the site and the trajectory very carefully in terms of the proposed housing numbers. I think neither the statement of common ground or the council's statement actually really addressed the question around phasing and how that site is going to come forward. And I think it would be useful, rather than going to too much detail today, to have a note on that, whether the council and Landsec could provide a more detailed note, just setting out how that site would come forward. And it's useful to hear about the two northern plots which are likely to come forward, but just how it would actually work in practice. I think that would be really helpful. Obviously, the parties have been subject to those discussions. I haven't, but I think in terms of the phasing and deliverability, it might give me some comfort that the site could come forward in the timeframe envisaged.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. We can work with the council on that. George, I think we've probably got the phasing plans already. As officers have said, Landsec have been through an incredible amount of detail in terms of the construction process of this. So plans to exist. We have a programme which the team are working towards. Those detailed plots, construction is targeted to begin on those in 2026 and completion in 2028. And we can sort of provide that information alongside the council in a sort of a note with a programme and some plans to set out clearly to the inspectors.
Certainly the trajectory seems on face value quite ambitious, which is why it would be helpful to have that note. So just in terms of planning application, I'll just ask the council where is that at? So you refer to planning application for the first two plots, but there's also this sort of overarching planning application with the master plan behind that. Where's that at?
Yeah, so there'll be a hybrid application being submitted early autumn time, and that will include the outline planning application and master plan, indicative master plan for the wider site, and then also the two detailed plots within that hybrid application. I mean, I would say just in terms of the deliverability and just thinking about the PPG, I understand the concerns regarding the complexity of the site, but we have no evidence to suggest that it cannot be delivered within the first 5 years. We have a development partner who is essentially saying it will be delivered. The council is effectively taking that on face value. I understand that it is a complex town centre site, but these complex town centre sites are delivered in London in fairly kind of regular order, particularly, and we can demonstrate that through the kind of Lewisham town centre work and the sites that have been delivered there as well.
Okay, so we're at 2024 now. Planning application anticipated in autumn. If that covers the whole town centre, I'm anticipating a planning obligation attached to that. There'll be likely to be a planning obligation associated with the wider site, or even the attached to the two separate plots. So I'm just thinking about time frame. So there's output 2027, 194 units, which means starting on site, delivering 194 units within that 27-28 financial year. So given that the application is not submitted, there'll need to be potentially 106. Can be contradicted on that. Discharge of conditions. How is that development going to be on site in 2027? It's quite ambitious.
I'll just keep going, excuse me. So we're aiming to get a planning application in relatively short period of time, as David said. So we have a PPA with the council. That's always a bit of a sort of dynamic situation, I suppose, with the ebb and flow of pre-apps, but we remain broadly on target to submit a planning application in September, October, and with a it's normal to set out a sort of target determination period. And obviously, a lot can happen during determination period. It's non-binding, of course, on the council, but we agreed that a sort of 6-month determination period felt reasonable as a sort of planning tool, if you like. And obviously, then we'll see what happens during that process. If that's the case, that means we would potentially be looking at stage 2 referral in the spring. We would commence later stages of design and procurement in parallel with that. And while that gives us an overall target of start on site around April 26, we would try and commence with some early works, some early demolition work that may not be pursuant to planning, for example, in the latter half of next year. So these are the assumptions that we're working to. That's what my current board paper says, and that would give us the first 2 blocks, which are in detail, roughly 2-year build period to get those 2 blocks complete and occupied. So that's where I think that first wave of delivery comes from, and that's the assumptions that we're setting out in both the application and what our internal assumptions are at the minute.
Okay, those 2 plots to the north seem more freestanding, potentially.
Yeah, and lower rise as well than some of the other plots in the master plan. So one is 21 stories, the other is maximum 13 stories. So the overall build period to occupancy is less than in some of the later phases where the buildings are taller and would have much longer build periods.
Again, ask the council as it's the council's plan. There's a trajectory. Well, we'll have 194 units, 27-28. Quite an increase, 364 units, if I'm reading that correctly. Can the council just explain why that increased to 364?
Yeah, these relate to the detailed plots. So one plot is 194 units, the other plot is 364. I mean, if we take the 27-28, 194, we could slip that to 28-29 if, Land Securities are saying that basically they'll be delivered at the same time, but fundamentally they'll be delivered in the 5-year period.
And the 199 units thereafter, and given what you said about the shopping centre being towards the latter part of the plan period and coming forward last, and the sort of, in a way, it's more complicated, isn't it, to deliver